Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to break down the hidden psychological mechanisms behind a really fascinating behavioral pattern, why some people intentionally keep their social circles very, very small. Understanding this completely shifts how we view human connection. It's not about being antisocial at all. It's actually about a deep, often completely misunderstood psychological drive.
Think about it for a second. Have you ever met someone who seems to know absolutely everyone in town, yet they actually trust almost no one? Or maybe you've got someone in your life who consistently turns down social invites, skillfully dodges large group gatherings, and just chooses to spend their free time with only one or two specific people. It's a super distinct pattern of behavior, isn't it? Let's dive into why that happens.
Section 1. The social misconception. Breaking down the stigma of the small circle. So, to an outsider looking in, individuals who limit their social interactions can easily come off as antisocial, lonely, or just kind of distant. Society constantly tells us that more friends equals more happiness, right? And that puts a pretty heavy stigma on anyone who prefers to fly solo or hang out with just a select few. But psychology reveals a very different, deeply intentional reality here. Keeping a small circle is rarely about lacking social skills. Actually, it is a deliberate, highly protective choice driven by how their brain specifically processes connection, energy, and trust. They aren't failing at socializing. They are choosing a completely different path entirely.
Moving on to Section 2, Managing Emotional Energy. Social interaction as an emotional battery.
I want you to think of social interaction like an emotional battery. We all operate on this sort of energy economy, but for what psychologists call deep feelers, the exchange rate is completely different. These are folks who are constantly overthinking conversations. They'll notice the most subtle changes in your tone of voice or catch a fleeting facial expression that literally everyone else misses. And because they're highly sensitive to the energy of others, they literally absorb the emotions of the people around them. They form strong emotional attachments super quickly, which means being in a massive crowd leaves them prone to severe cognitive and emotional overload. The brains literally start to associate more people with more stress.
Because they process human connection with such incredible depth, having way too many ties makes their internal world feel, well, completely chaotic. So what's the logical psychological response to that? They build a wall. By intentionally restricting access, they find emotional safety and prevent that overwhelming fatigue. It's essentially a survival mechanism to protect their emotional battery from draining to zero.
Section 3, Depth over Small Talk. The Craving for Meaningful Connection.
Once you understand those emotional energy limits, their whole value system just makes perfect sense. Large circles often thrive on surface-level stuff, small talk, chatting about the weather, basically just filling time. But people who curate small circles operate on a totally different wavelength. They require deep, useful conversations and intentional selectivity. Their minds are naturally drained by empty chatting. Psychologically speaking, these individuals would much rather have one rare, deeply meaningful connection than 50 shallow ones. To them, a small circle isn't a sign of isolation, it's the absolute ultimate sign of selectivity.
Which brings us to Section 4, the psychological fortress, the need for emotional safety and self-protection.
Quiet or highly private individuals often feel this profound, undeniable need to keep their innermost thoughts, feelings, and fears securely behind a closed door. They build what we can call a psychological fortress. It's a highly selective, trusted inner circle created so they can just be their true selves without the fear of being misunderstood or judged by a massive crowd. Psychology shows us that people often hide their biggest insecurities because, let's face it, vulnerability feels intensely dangerous. So by keeping their circle microscopic and only letting a few deeply trusted people in, they maintain total control over their inner world. They're basically building a safe haven where the armor can finally come off.
Let's look at Section 5, the internal identity. Authenticity over performance.
This deep need for safety completely dictates how they view themselves. We live in this dominant social media culture, right? A world where so many people use massive networks to seek out likes, constant attention, and a sense of social status. But highly selective individuals, they get almost zero emotional reward from external visibility. They absolutely do not need a crowd to validate their worth, because their self-worth is entirely internally driven. They prefer experiencing life privately, relying on internal validation, which totally frees them from that exhaustive performative pressure to maintain a huge social network. They choose authenticity over performance every single time.
And finally, Section 6, Quality over Quantity. Selectivity is a feature, not a bug.
The core takeaway of this explainer is that maintaining a small circle doesn't mean someone is broken, and it certainly doesn't mean they're disconnected from humanity. It really all comes down to one incredibly powerful philosophy: prioritize the quality of peace over the quantity of acquaintances. I absolutely love that quote because it perfectly encapsulates the psychological reality we've been unpacking. It's just a brilliant, empowering mindset that validates the choices of anyone who curates their social environment for the sake of their own mental well-being.
Once you understand these small nuances, you start to notice the patterns that most people completely overlook. The mind of someone with a small social circle is not antisocial. Actually, scratch that. It's quite the opposite. It's highly attuned, deeply feeling, and incredibly intentional about exactly who it allows into its private world.
So, I want to leave you with this final thought to chew on. Are you highly intentional about who you allow into your world? Take a hard look at your own social boundaries and the energy you're giving out. Well, thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. If you enjoyed uncovering the hidden psychology behind everyday behavior, make sure to subscribe so we can keep learning together. See you next time.